In this video we're looking at the beginning of Act 3 of An Inspector Calls, where Eric has just returned and is having to reveal his story and his version of what he did with Eva. Now, it starts with his return. He's been gone the whole of Act 2. It has been just before the end of Act 1 when he went outside with the Inspector. And in the meantime, we've heard he's gone outside. The revelations have been there, if we didn't know already, which I think we did, about him being a drunk. And right at the end of Act 2, of course, we realise that he is the one responsible for the condition that Eva was in. So we're set up in a position of dramatic irony to a degree, although everybody else on the stage, apart from Eric, knows what's gone on as well. The key in this section really at the beginning, where prior to him actually telling us what goes on, is his emotional state. Obviously he has been drinking, but we really focus on how distressed he is at this point. And it's clear he knows it was him, he's got that, he's understood it, and he can't cope. If you remember right back at the beginning of the play, he was described in the stage directions as not at ease with himself, half shy, half assertive. He clearly didn't fit in. He wasn't comfortable in his own skin. And that's something that's very, very clear in this section. But at the same time, what we see is his parents focusing on telling Sheila off for not being loyal or a part of, or on their side as they see it. So at the beginning we see an interesting contrast between the stage directions, the manner in which his mother, that's the first one distressed here, and him bitterly speak. I know we're saying that Eric is distressed, but the mother, we saw her break down at the end of Act 2 when she realised it's Eric. We saw her speech break apart for the first time. We saw her lose composure, and throughout this section she struggles dreadfully, which again shows her connection with Eric. This is the thing that has bothered her the most. But the fact that Eric is bitter at this point, I suppose, gives a sense of insight into him. Yeah, we're going to see him be totally honest about it, take responsibility, feel bad about it, but the idea of feeling bitter towards other people does maybe suggest he's not completely accepted that it's totally his fault, maybe. His mother carries on with the ridiculous statement here that he's not the type, when it's blatantly obvious to everybody watching the play that he is the type that would do this. And to follow that up with "you don't get drunk," just again, it probably even overdoes it in emphasising how out of touch his mother is in understanding him. Not only does he not get drunk, he rarely seems to get sober. So at the opening of Act 3, Priestley is really making sure that we see the generation gap, the gap between their understanding as well as their attitudes. And to emphasise that is Sheila, who says that it was simply bound to come out tonight, talking about his drinking as well as everything else, showing at this point her understanding of the way that the evening is going, that truth is the only way forward. But to emphasise where this act is going to go with the parents afterwards, we get here, first of all, Sybil, and secondly, Arthur, giving their reactions to her saying this. Rather than try and understand it, "I don't understand your attitude, if you'd had any sense of loyalty." And the key words for me there are attitude from mother. So "I don't understand you," it's the approach you're taking. And yes, she doesn't understand her attitude. Her attitude is that we need to confront the reality, and she shows she doesn't understand it. And for Mr. Burling, for Arthur, to talk about loyalty at this stage, again, it gives us a greater sense of him and where he's looking at. Loyalty to the family rather than to the truth, and no concern, again, about Eva and what they've done to her. So again, all this contrast that's there, that's showing the gap between Eric and Sheila and their parents at this point. Now, of course, at the same time, we've got the inspector here, and we finish with him getting involved here. The reason this dispute doesn't go any further is because he cuts across it. But it's interesting that he talks about the idea of, well, first of all, that they can adjust their family relationships differently. He's not bothered about family relationships. That's of no interest to the inspector at all. But it's again this reference that starts to crop up in this section. When he's talking about when he's gone, he starts to talk about time a great deal, as though he is coming to the end of his time there, as though it's set from somewhere. It's again another idea that he seems to belong to almost another plane or something else as we come in. And when he carries on then with Eric wanting a drink and Burling explosively saying no, the inspector takes over and actually becomes more of a parent to Eric than Burling ever is. I know he's your son and is your house, but look at him. Essentially telling them, actually stop reacting in the way you think you should react to your children. Yes, drink may be the problem, but look at him at the moment. Yeah? As he says afterwards, he needs a drink now just to see him through. He understands the state that Eric is in, whereas Burling either doesn't understand or doesn't care. And of course this leads to Eric going for a whiskey, pouring it himself, and as it says here, showing his familiarity with heavy drinking. Now, in every production I've seen of this is a quite dramatic moment in which he tends to gulp down the whiskey as though it's water. And then, Burling comes out with, I understand a lot of things now I didn't understand before. And even though I haven't written that phrase down here, it's a lovely bit of an irony there. Well, his better says don't start on that. Yeah, he understands certain things, but he doesn't understand the things he needs to. So in this opening return, when you look at all of this together, what we're getting is this sense of the family beginning to break apart into generations. We're getting this sense of Burling's inability to cope with what's happening. But we're also beginning to see the reality of Eric, that awkwardness that we saw at the beginning of the play is coming out. That then morphs into him retelling his story. Now, the story is a disturbing one. It is essentially one of rape, because he has forced himself within there. Now, I would argue that I don't think Priestley necessarily sees it that way. Maybe he does, but he's certainly quite light on Eric in comparison to what he's done. I think for us as a modern audience, it's almost impossible when we hear what Eric did to have any kind of sympathy for him. Yet, the way the play is written seems to require us to be sympathetic. We do see Eric throughout this story then be open and honest, but I don't think at any point does he actually come over very well. Oh, to start, it's easily missed, but when he talks about being in the Palace Bar, being there an hour or so with 2 or 3 chaps, just sets up a little thing about his life. A bunch of them hanging around in the Palace Bar, which we already know is a hangout for prostitutes. This is the life that he's leading, and also that other men are leading at the same time. Just like when Gerald says she was different from the others, he notices she wasn't the usual sort. So again, Priestley is creating a distinction, making it seem to us that Eva doesn't really belong there, but also at the same time, just like with Gerald, showing us a predatory sense that the two of them have. She's not the usual sort, and that leads both of them over to actually take advantage of her. So again, men as predators in this situation. There is a little bit I haven't added to here, which is a very interesting bit where she says there was a woman who wanted her to go there. I never quite understood about that. Never really explained, never really taken further. I don't know if that's meant to suggest innocence from her point of view, that she didn't choose to go there and prostitute herself, or whether there's something else about exploitation here. The idea that, and again, the fact it's a woman at the same point, exploiting her. Anyway, as he then carries on and talks about taking her back to her lodgings, the key thing we have, of course, is the fact that he pushes himself on her. He insists on coming in. He's in a state when a chap, as he says, easily turns nasty. Now, a lot of people I've seen before focus on the word chap in here. I don't think that really helps much. It just seems to be the way he talks just before. You could suggest he's distancing himself a little bit from it, but I think that would only be to do with shame. I wouldn't think that's to do with him making excuses. He's being totally open and honest around what he's doing here. And maybe it explains his drunken state, that he sees himself almost as somebody different here. But again, what's more interesting to me is this idea of easily turns nasty. Again, Eric is not coming over well. He is the kind of person who gets into that state, and when he does, he turns nasty. He has a difficult side to him. I mean, think what could have happened to Eva. It also keeps Eva innocent, showing that she really had no choice. He would turn nasty, and of course we know that no one would believe her over him in this kind of world. Now, it's also worth noting that Burling, at this point, decides he wants to get Mrs. Burling out of the room and gets Sheila to take her along. It's a strange thing because she doesn't last very long. She comes back in pretty quickly. I'm not entirely sure why that's done, but it does show that Burling is again still trying to take control of the situation in the room, still seeing the idea of having to protect his wife. And it does allow this sharply to contrast with the idea of him speaking to Sheila more gently while speaking sharply to Sheila. So we get that contrast between his attitude towards his wife and towards his daughter. Now, as he continues to tell the story and tell that story that, they met up again and they carried on and they did various things. Another example which kind of suggests to me that maybe Priestley doesn't see it the way we do, because it's a little bit disturbing to portray Sheila as somebody who would continue to get together with her rapist. But anyway, it's as it is on the page. He reveals his attitude towards her. She wasn't the usual sort. We've had the predatory thing. He turns nasty. We've had the danger he has. But just to refer to her as a good sport shows how little he really thought of her at this point. She was a bit of fun. And I think it also reveals a lack of understanding of what Eva actually is, the fact she is another person. Now, he is talking about at the time, and it is debatable as to whether he still feels this way and still hasn't understood, or whether this is just showing the difference between him before the inspector came in and now. But he certainly doesn't cover himself with glory when he then does pretty much exactly what Gerald does earlier in referring to other prostitutes as fat old tarts and telling us he hates them. I mean, the hatred of prostitutes is something that we associate with, some very ugly events and situations indeed. And there's no real reason for him to hate them. He could say he hates those respectable friends going around with these people, but I hate these fat old tarts. Very immature. There's quite a bit of women hating going on there. The point's still made that the supposedly respectable friends of Burling go around with them. But I do think at this point, again, very important to see that Eric is not coming over that well. Eva clearly understands him better than almost anybody else, apart from maybe Sheila. And of course, the connection of Sheila and Eva understanding him brings back the idea that Sheila and Eva are very similar, by pointing out that she sees how immature and how childish he is, even though they're about the same age. He seems to be surprised she did this. I don't think any of us are. And then, of course, we get the refusal of money, which shows her moral grounding in a situation where we've just recently had Mrs. Burling's insistence on her own kind of outdated and very unimportant moral situations, her insistence on impertinence and, you know, how people who are rude don't deserve to be helped. Here we see genuine morality, a desperate woman refusing to take more money because it is stolen. So within the story, what have we got? Once again, Eva is coming over as this almost saint-like innocent girl, completely exploited. But Eric comes across as, yes, very unhappy. Yes, he's been destroyed by his parents, by a combination of his privilege and his lack of self-worth. But he's a predator. He is a woman hater. He is a rapist. It's very difficult for us to see anything good about him after this. Now, bringing this section to a close is when he finds out that it was his mother who caused the death of Eva, following on from this by refusing her help. And Priestley seems to use this to show us what began at the beginning of Act 3 here, that the family unit is totally splitting apart at this point. We get the response to the theft. Burling, as you know, it's very, very clear, is far, far more disturbed by him stealing money than by what he did to Eva. And Mrs. Burling, his mother, is shocked as well that he stole, rather than anything that he potentially did with Eva. Although, having said that, do bear in mind, she did miss some of the details of what happened, but she did hear that he forced himself on her. So both of them much more concerned with theft than with apparent rape. And Burling never covers himself in glory, and this pretty much sums up exactly where he is. He's a criminal. I've got to cover this up. You know, I mean, right in front of a police officer, that's his immediate reaction. Hide the wrongdoing. So he's suggesting criminal activity himself in there. Sort of the standard thing of saying, why didn't you come to me? And of course this line, which so many people use, but it is so effective. You're not the kind of father a chap could go to when he's in trouble. Now, by the way, I made that point about the word chap earlier on. I mean, if you're going to say that about when he says, I'd state when a chap easily turns nasty, you've got to say it about here, that he's also saying that it's not just him, it's everybody. By doing so here, really the point is that it's showing the difference between him and his father, how bad the relationship between them is. He understands and does not trust him in any kind of a way. And of course Burling follows this up by proving him directly right. Don't talk to me like that. You're not the kind of father someone would go to when he's in trouble. Don't talk to me like that. Well, there you go. That's exactly why. And then to accuse him of being spoilt, when of course who spoils a child? The parents. So it's not his responsibility. Basically, Burling has completely lost any sense of who he is in any way at all, and is showing up the very worst sides of him. But of course the inspector takes control and stops it from going out of line. And we're back again to this strange comment of the inspector. I haven't much time. Why hasn't he much time? What's he got to do? Where's he got to go? It's an interesting statement, especially related to the idea they've got as much time after he leaves as they need. But he talks about dividing a responsibility between you when I've gone. It seems like a throwaway line, but of course that's what he encourages them to do. And it is what they do, but they do it badly. The parents try and force the responsibility down onto Eric in particular, and refuse to take any themselves. Then the revelation comes of what happened to Eva at the hands of Mrs. Burling. And we get this idea that Eric has now, from his distress, is now breaking. He's breaking apart completely. Okay, he cannot cope. And his repetition of damn you, is really quite violent and aggressive towards his own mother. Again, in some adaptations of this, at this point, they have Eric actually attack his mother. And certainly she can't cope with it afterwards. She's very distressed and says, "No, Eric, please, I didn't know, I didn't understand," with her language broken apart again. But just after the "you're not the kind of father," we've now got damning his own mother. We couldn't see a family more destroyed by this than if we wanted to. Now, what you need to think about is that is part of the point that Priestley is making. So yes, it's all about Eva. It's what happened to Eva. It's what they did to Eva. But by going through what they did to Eva, this family that sat together in pink intimate lighting, talking about the future and supposedly feeling very happy with themselves, a nice little family celebration, as he calls it, has now fallen apart entirely, and particularly splitting down the middle of the generations. That final stage direction, shall we say, of how Burling speaks at the end shows how far away from Eric he is himself. As just like his angrily "don't talk to me like that," he intervenes between the two of them, and he is furious at his son, yet his son surely has a point. So this leads on into our final section, when the inspector leaves, makes his point, but of course leaves us with an important ending in which they just don't listen. But we know they're not going to, because we know historically that the wars did happen.